So this is a talk on Gatsby Themes. And yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about what themes are. About half of you have already heard of or read about or used themes. So themes are a powerful new abstraction for building Gatsby sites. As Kyle just said, they're basically like composable components that encapsulate any Gatsby site functionality that you might have. And you can ship it as an NPM package and then install it in another site, and then use it or override it as much as you want. So in short, themes are NPM installable Gatsby sites. And when we talk about themes, one of the things that comes up quite often is sort of token swaps and sort of the CSS Zen Garden approach to themes. Token swaps are basically purely UI. You get a set of tokens, you pass them into something like a theme provider, you use them as CSS variables, etc. And then you can sort of swap them out from light mode to dark mode, which is one use case that's been popularized lately. It's sort of like CSS Zen Garden is another approach to this, right? Where you basically have some structure in HTML, and based on which style sheet you include, it looks completely different. I know CSS Zen Garden is a little old at this point, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's actually really cool. So typically there's one theme or one theme that swaps from like light to dark, right? And then there's themes and ecosystems like WordPress and Hugo. And this is much closer to what we mean when we say Gatsby themes. WordPress, typically you have a single theme, you install it. Hugo, you have a single theme, you install it, you basically vendor it into your Git repo, right? They usually come with a visual style. And in the case of WordPress, you can turn your blog into an e-commerce store, right? So they add functionality as well. Which brings us to like, what are Gatsby themes specifically? And like I said before, they're a new abstraction for building Gatsby sites that are just as flexible as building regular Gatsby sites, but in a way that is way easier to consume for our peers who may not have the same knowledge that we have about building out entire Gatsby sites like GraphQL. So going back to sort of token swaps and the CSS Zen Garden ideas, token swaps are more of a runtime thing, right? So with Gatsby themes, you can build the infrastructure that supports a token swap, right? You can support light mode and dark mode. But you might want to configure that with different light modes and dark modes depending on whose blog you're on, right? And then the CSS Zen Garden approach usually sticks to you with a specific HTML structure, right? Gatsby Themes takes this a step further with something that we'll talk about later called component shadowing that allows you to actually change the structure as well as the styling of any React component in your entire site. So instead of just working with divs, we can work with richer types like post list or post. Talking a little bit about the comparison to WordPress or Hugo. Typically, WordPress sites are single themes, right? You'll install your e-commerce theme, and then you'll have your e-commerce site. And if it comes with a blog, then great. And if it doesn't, well, good luck. In Gatsby, you can actually have multiple themes, right? So Gatsby has a set of abstractions already implemented, as we'll talk about in a little bit, that allow you to build higher level abstractions on top, which means that you can take entire chunks of functionality, visual design, components, and data fetching, encapsulate them into an NPM package, and share them across a set of sites. So you could have a blog with MDX and file system source and markdown transformation and things like that. And you can have an e-commerce theme, and you can use them in the same site. So Gatsby themes compose functionality more like Lego blocks. And that brings us to sort of like, why are we building themes at all? And the answer comes back to sort of the core of what makes Gatsby Gatsby, and that you don't have to dig down into Webpack to build a Gatsby site, right? So we have a set of abstractions today in Gatsby, but we can have a higher level of abstraction that allows you to build sites even faster. So this is an example of the lower level APIs that Gatsby offers today. How many people are familiar with the lifecycle events and things like that? Cool. So that's most people. If you're not, these are basically APIs that Gatsby offers you. They're wrapped up in plugins. You can use them in your site. It allows us to share functionality on quite a low level, right? It's not quite as low level as setting up a Webpack config manually, but it allows plugins to insert chunks of Webpack config and things like that, so you don't have to worry about it. But there are some issues with plugins, right? Plugins can't add other plugins. If I want to have a blog plugin, and I want that to have MDX and to be sourceable from the file system or sourceable from a CMS, I can't add both of those plugins at the same time from my blog plugin, right? And the other thing is that the abstractions that we're talking about, these lifecycle APIs, are lower level APIs. So they're very useful and they're very flexible, and we can use them to do almost anything. But you can also use them to do almost anything, right? So it takes some work. So who are themes for? And themes are actually for a wide range of people. I'm only going to skim this list fairly quickly. Themes are for people who are new to Gatsby, right? So if you want to install a blog, you want to write some markdown, you want to go, themes are for you. If you are somebody who has a common use case and you want to share sort of the maintenance burden of that, themes are for you. You can build a Gatsby theme blog. You can help open source that and maintain it with a group of different people. And then everybody benefits from this work, right? In the classic open source sense. Themes are for entrepreneurs who want to build their own products and sell them, or build themes and sell them. And they're also for designers. So one thing that I mentioned earlier is that you can just sort of have a folder of markdown files, install a theme, and you get a blog, right? So if you're less familiar with React and you're less familiar with GraphQL, how do you skin a blog? Well, you can just create a child theme by creating a couple of files, overriding a couple of styles, and ship it. And this is just an example of sort of the low-level APIs are there, they're useful, they're very good, but sometimes even the most experienced among us need something higher level. And we want something that just, we install it, we use it, we override a couple things, and we're done. We don't want to build every site from scratch all the time. So let's talk a little bit about use cases, right? There are a couple use cases listed here. The first one is you just want a blog. You have a folder of markdown files, you want a blog, you don't really care what it looks like, you just need to ship something. Themes can handle this, right? If you want documentation and you want a blog on the same site, it's the same process. You just install an additional package. You might want to customize the branding of a theme, right? Customize the colors, customize the logo. You might want to build themes to sell, right? You might be an agency or a larger company that builds your own internal Create React app, right? And today in Gatsby land, you don't really have supported ways to build your own Create React app and ship it to people that can then use all of those pieces. But themes, as opposed to starters, now lets you update via NPM every time there's a new version. So if you're using an automatic dependency manager that'll submit a PR every time you publish, you can publish, it'll bump the version, and then you'll get a bunch of PRs on a bunch of different sites that already use it, and you can just upgrade. And finally, a more advanced case of data sourcing, which I'll get into a little bit later. So this is an example of the blog use case, right? You just want a blog. You have a folder of markdown files. You want a blog. You want it to go. This is everything you need to do. You initialize a new project. You add the blog theme, and you use the blog theme. If you've never seen this before, this is the key in the Gatsby config that you use to specify which themes you're going to use. And notice that it's an array, because if you want docs and a blog, you can install the docs theme and the blog theme. In this case, we're using docz. And you just have two themes. So now you have documentation for your project, but you also have a blog to talk about your project. And themes take options, right? So In the case that we were talking about earlier, where you might want to change a bunch of tokens to have a light theme and a dark theme, you can pass those in your theme options. And you can pass in a number of different things in your theme options. So if you're using styled system, maybe you want to set a very specific set of tokens. We'll dive in a little bit to how themes work. And themes boil down to the Gatsby config. So if you are unfamiliar with themes and you need like the most concise explanation of themes that you could possibly have, themes are composable Gatsby configs. So if you have 3 Gatsby configs and you want to build one site, how do you do that? Right? A Gatsby config is an object, so we object assign the 3 objects, and you basically get a new site. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the right mental model. So in this case, we have the MDX plugin, the Emotion plugin, the file system plugin at a specific directory, and an Airtable plugin. Let's say we wanted basically everything here, but the Airtable plugin was some specific stuff to that site, and we just want to leave it. So there's some shareable logic, which we abstract into the Gatsby Themes, super awesome. And then there's the site-specific logic, which we use with Gatsby Source Airtable. So in our themes Gatsby config, we just take that chunk of Gatsby config and we move it over. And congratulations, you just wrote your first theme. And everything else sort of emerges from this idea of composing the low-level APIs as plugins into full site blocks. So if you've done this, it may not be obvious about how you can reuse that in a way that allows you to change things across different sites, right? You might be thinking, hey, if I have an NPM package and I use that NPM package, I can't really change that NPM package, right? I don't want to go into node modules every time I want to change something about my site, like the header. And themes allow you to configure them. Themes allow you to replace components, and themes allow you to extend components. So, as I said before, themes allow you to configure them. In this case, we have the Gatsby Themes superblog. And in the superblog, we have the option to specify a set number of tags that we have to use. You cannot use any tag that is not in this list. And this is your Gatsby config, so you get to specify what these tags are. This prevents you from basically having the tag pizza and the tag pizzas across all of your different tags, right? And Gatsby configs can be a function for themes. They can't be a function in regular sites, but they can be a function in themes, which allows you to take these options and totally change how you construct the Gatsby config as a result of those options. So in this case, we add a validation plugin for our tags. This plugin doesn't exist, so don't try to go install it. And then there's another option, right? We can use the lifecycle methods that we are already used to in our themes. So in this case, we take the tags that are coming in as theme options in a source node's lifecycle. We use the new schema customization API to create a new enum with that list of tags. And if we use a tag, such as milk duds, that doesn't exist in our list, it immediately breaks. And this is a fairly basic error message, but it's the default one that you'll get. You can also make this much more customizable, and you can do whatever you want here. And then we get into shadowing. Shadowing is how you take a set of React components that are included in your site, and you override them, right? So this is a complete example of shadowing. We have our site. We have the Gatsby config for our site in the package JSON, which specifies some dependencies. In our node modules, we have our Gatsby theme super awesome that we built before. In that theme, we have source components, blog post item. To override the rendering of that component everywhere in our site, we create one additional file in our site at source, Gatsby theme super awesome, components, blog post item. And this replaces everywhere that React component is used. So if we have a bio component like the Gatsby starter does, the Gatsby starter blog, and we want to override it as part of a theme, we can create a new bio component and completely change the structure and the styling and how it uses any of the props. So shadowed components, stick exactly in the same spot in the React tree as the previous component, which means they get the props, they get access to the context, etc. It works for any file in source. And like I said before, it's a direct replacement of the file, so it gets the same props, etc. You can also extend components. So you don't always want to just take the code that's in your theme and copy and paste it out and then like go find things, etc., right? Sometimes what you want to do is you want to import the component from your theme. You want to make a couple changes. In this case, we've decided that we don't want excerpts anywhere on our site, so we're just going to pass in an empty string. And then we're going to re-export the same component. And this allows us to opt into upgrading like we talked about before. So the next time an NPM package for our theme is published, we get to upgrade, we get the same blog post item, and we've just made a slight modification to it. So we're pretty confident that this isn't going to break. Shadowing can get a little bit more complicated, right? So for more advanced use cases, you might be building a theme that is a child theme that supports a number of other different themes, right? Using latent shadowing, which, as we've seen before, to create a shadow file, you just created a specific point in a directory. Shadowing works for themes and for sites. So we did it in a site before, but we can do it in a child theme as well. And we can do it in a way that allows us to set up a set of shadowed files. If we say we really like pink and we have Gatsby theme pink, and we want you to be able to install Gatsby theme blog and Gatsby theme e-commerce, and we still want you to be able to use our theme to override all the styling of those themes. We can create a set of files in the specific directories for those themes inside of our child theme, and whenever you install one of the other themes that we support, it'll just work. And when all else fails, you can use the low-level APIs. So we haven't gotten rid of anything. This is all in addition. This is all a higher level of abstraction. If the higher level of abstraction doesn't work for you, inside of your theme, you can drop down to the lower level APIs at any time. Which brings us a little bit to the roadmap and the other projects that we're working on as part of the themes team. Data abstraction is the idea that we can use data types across different themes. So if we have a blog data type, we can set up a bunch of child themes that use that same type, and we can have a bunch of other themes in the ecosystem that interact with that type, right? So if you have a blog post, as opposed to all MDX or all file or all markdown remark, then we can source it from anywhere, right? You can source it from the file system, you can source it from a CMS. And we're still early on this, but it builds on top of the schema customization APIs. And everything beyond this slide is experimental. So to be clear, themes core, the composition, the Gatsby configs composing together, pretty stable. Shadowing itself, pretty stable, hasn't changed in a long time. Data abstractions, new. If you want to get into them, they're, beware. Everything else I'm about to show you beyond this slide is not ready for production, but it's stuff we're working on to make ready for production. The first one is System UI, which is a design token format spec. And if you want to talk more about design systems or tokens or theme UI and system UI, Jackson is standing in the back. If anybody wants to turn around and see his hand up. Talk to him. DesignQL is a reference implementation of System UI. We're intending for this to generate documentation so that you can use a set of components that implement DesignQL, and your Gatsby theme will automatically get a set of documentation that people can use, right? Today, if you build an NPM package, it's not automatically documented. Unless you write all that documentation yourself, nobody's going to know what you're doing, right? Nobody's going to know how to use it. Theme UI is a component library that builds on top of the previous two. We're intending to use this as the base for the Gatsby official themes. It's currently used on Gatsby Theme Digital Garden, so if you want to see an example use case of these specs in action, go check that out. And it comes with solutions for scoping and documentation and things like that, right? So I just talked about sort of automatic documentation generation for your themes. There's also the concern of once you get into themes and once you get into shadowing, how do you scope your styles such that when somebody shadows a component, you're not blowing up everything else up? One last thing is we have blocks, the open source block editor. Believe it's out as an alpha right now if you want to go look at the GitHub repo. It's backed by MDX, so it's basically a block editor that serializes to MDX and then serializes back into the block editor. So it's human authorizable format. And we're hoping to partner with sort of third-party design tools and CMSs and things like that to get this editor into everybody's hands. It's completely open source. If you don't know what a block editor is, think of Notion or Dropbox Paper or Google Docs or something like that. CLI improvements so that when you look at what components can be shadowed and what components are being shadowed currently, we want you to be able to just go to the Gatsby CLI or a Gatsby app and just say, OK, show me everything that's being shadowed. Why is this component the way it is? How do I find out what components I can override later? Which brings us to the end. Gatsby themes, composable Gatsby configs, configurable and shadowable, npm installable, and as modular or as monolithic as you want them to be. Thank you.